I think I might get started, and as people are coming in, they can join in with where we're up to. So welcome everybody. My name's Leigha Dark and I'm the chair for this first research session. Lovely to see people filtering in. So we've got 4 great presentations today and we are going to get going right now so that everyone has their allocated time to do their presentation. A little bit of housekeeping, this session is being recorded, so if you don't want to appear on video, just turn your video off if that's what you would prefer. We don't have a chat function, but at the end of each presentation, all going well, we'll have a little bit of time for people to actually come off mute and ask their questions. Again, if you could use the raise your hand function up on the top bar to indicate that you've got a question, and then I can invite you to ask that question. I think they're the main things, so we're going to get into it. As I said, we've got 4 presentations today. We're kicking off with Krista McMorran-Maus, and Krista is a speech language pathologist in the US. She's completed her master's degree in communication sciences and disorders at California State University and began then working in a public school district with children up to the age of 17 years. And Krista's currently completing her PhD in education at Chapman University in Orange, California. And she's here today to share her research that she's conducting for her dissertation. So welcome, Krista, and thank you very much. You're just on mute there, Krista. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Good morning and welcome to a reintroduction of keyword sign in the US. My name is Krista McMorran-Maus and I'm a speech language pathologist in the US, and I evaluate and provide early start services to deaf and hard of hearing children from birth to age 3. I'm also a doctoral candidate at Chapman University in Orange, California, and I'm completing my PhD in education with a disability studies emphasis. My dissertation committee includes Dr. Scott Danforth, Don Hunter, Carlos Lopez, and Andy Smidt. In the United States, there are approximately 11.2 million children who have special healthcare needs, and approximately 280,000 of these children need augmentative and alternative communication systems. Research has shown that students' successful use of AAC is directly related to special education teachers' AAC knowledge, skills, and dispositions. If special education teachers do not have the knowledge or the skills, the knowledge barriers and skill barriers may occur. Specifically, knowledge barriers occur when people lack the information about AAC intervention options, technology, and instructional strategies. And skill barriers occur when someone may have the extensive AAC knowledge, but they have difficulty implementing the AAC techniques or strategies. And these two barriers, knowledge and skill barriers, they can lead to participation barriers, which limit the participation opportunities of individuals who rely on AAC. In the US, special education teachers often report inadequate AAC knowledge and training. As a result, speech language pathologists are often responsible for providing AAC training to staff. However, they often have limited time due to large caseloads, and they also often lack the operational competence and preparedness to provide the AAC services and staff trainings. This brings me to the problem statement for my research study. If communication partners are not adequately trained, then knowledge barriers and skill barriers may occur, which become barriers to AAC use and student participation. Therefore, special education teachers and SLPs must be taught how to use multiple modes of communication so that they can convey information to and receive information from students who rely on AAC. And this is per the American with Disabilities Act here in the United States. It's important to realize that multiple AAC systems or modalities may be used in combination so that individuals who rely on AAC may change their communication mode based upon content, audience, and communicative intent. Keyword sign is one of those modalities that's important for SLPs to learn, as well as special education teachers. In the US, SLPs learn of National Sign Language, manually coded language and sign systems, and keyword signing such as Makaton. However, there are no evidence-based training programs for keyword sign using ASL here in the United States. Because there are no training programs here in the US, I looked to research that was related to training communication partners how to use manual signs from natural sign languages or how to use keyword sign. And I did find six studies which are listed here. These 6 studies, they demonstrated that communication partners can learn to understand and produce signs. They can use signs or keyword signs during daily routines and spontaneous conversations. They can teach children and adults with intellectual disabilities to use signs. They can provide opportunities for children with intellectual disabilities to use signs, and they can elicit signs from children and adults with intellectual disabilities. A review of the study showed that most participants were employed by transitional, residential, and daycare facilities for individuals with developmental or intellectual disabilities. And these facilities provided services to adolescents and adults. No study solely recruited participants who were employed by local educational agencies such as public elementary schools or provided services to preschool or school-age children. The review also showed that participants were taught signs from British Sign Language, Flemish Keyword Sign System, Auslan, and Signed English. No study taught participants manual signs from ASL. Therefore, there is a need for studies to evaluate the effectiveness of manual sign or keyword sign trainings that recruit participants who are employed by local educational agencies, such as public elementary schools, and provide services to preschool or school-age children, and teach the participants manual signs from ASL. This brings me to the research questions that I'm going to be answering with my research study. So these questions include, what is the effect of a keyword sign workshop on in-service special education teachers and speech-language pathologists' skill identifying manual signs, producing manual signs, using keyword sign in the classroom or therapy room, as well as what are their perceived changes from taking part in a keyword sign workshop? To answer these questions, I'm using 4 research designs. The first one is an A/B single case design with repeated post-test measures over time. I'm going to be recruiting at a maximum of 9 educational specialists or special education teachers and SLPs. They're going to be attending a keyword sign workshop, and then I will assess their receptive and expressive sign skill 1 week before the workshop and 6 times after the workshop. For the A/B single subject design, I'm going to ask 3 of my participants if I may observe them in their classroom or therapy room working with one of their students. And I will observe them 3 to 5 times before the workshop and 5 times after the workshop. For the survey design, all my participants, my maximum of 9 educational specialists, they will complete an acceptability questionnaire 1 week after the workshop. And the purpose of this survey is to look at the participants, their reaction to the reaction to the workshop, as well as their learning from the workshop. I used Kirkpatrick's 4-level training evaluation model to design the survey, and it contains 11 closed and open-ended questions. The last research design, phenomenological research, again, all my participants, they will be involved in semi-structured interviews. So to design the semi-structured interviews, I again looked at Kirkpatrick's 4-level training evaluation model, and with the questions, I'm going to find out information about the participants' behavior or their application of keyword sign in their classrooms and therapy rooms as a result of attending the workshop, as well as any results that they may have observed from using keyword sign or manual signs in the classroom or therapy room. And I will conduct these interviews 4 times after the workshop. As far as the skills, my dependent variables are the skills I'm going to be measuring during my assessments. During my research study. I'll be looking at the number of manual signs that the participants correctly identify and produce, as well as a number of signed utterances, signs, and different signs that they will be using, that they use in their classrooms and therapy rooms during the observations. My independent variable is a 6-hour keywords signed workshop that I designed. To develop the keyword sign workshop, I referenced the Keyword Sign Australia presenter training from 2019 that Elizabeth Brownlee shared with me. I also looked to the direct instruction model, the communication partner instruction model, as well as relevant research or evidence that I found, as well as research and evidence that was shared with me by Andy Smidt. The objectives for my keyword sign workshop include, I want my participants to be able to demonstrate an understanding of keyword signing and communication partner strategies. I want them to be able to identify and produce 79 ASL signs and 12 gestures. And I want them to demonstrate the skill to use spoken language and manual signs simultaneously, or in other words, use keyword sign. As far as the vocabulary that I chose for my workshop, I looked at 3 suggested initial and core vocabularies, which were from the research studies listed here. When I selected the vocabulary for my workshop, I took into consideration whether the words were substantive words or relational words. I also took into consideration semantic and grammatical rules. So substantive words, sorry, they refer to, those are words that are specific to an individual's environment, as well as the people or objects that they frequently encounter in those environments. And relational words are less specific words, and they may be used with many different objects or events. To determine which of the ASL signs that I'm going to be teaching are guessable, I administered a keyword sign vocabulary assessment. For this assessment, I recruited 11 adults that had no ASL knowledge, and I asked them to watch the videos of ASL signs and guess the meanings of the signs. It was decided that if 7 or more participants correctly guessed the signs' meanings, then those signs were deemed guessable. As a result, 8 of the 79 ASL signs were considered guessable. And the inter-reader reliability for this assessment was 88.6%. And the results from this assessment were used to create balanced sign lists for the receptive and expressive sign assessments. And this is what my research study is going to look like as it takes place over a course of 13 weeks. So it shows the workshop, the manual sign assessments, the acceptability questionnaire, interviews, and observations of the dyads, of the special education teacher or SLP and student dyads. So thank you. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Krista. That sounds fabulous and very comprehensive and very well designed to cover lots of different aspects and answer your research questions. And thank you so much for powering through and coming in under time. So we do actually have some time for questions. Yeah, from our participants, if anyone would like to ask anything or comment. Sherry, yes. Feel free to come off mute.
Hey, you gave an overview of what the research lay of the land is in the USA in terms of keyword sign, but what is the on-the-ground lay of the land in the US in terms of keyword sign?
As far as the use of keyword sign, it's not very frequent, unfortunately. To be honest with you, not a lot of people are familiar with the term keyword sign. There are specialists, speech language pathologists and special education teachers that do use manual signs with their students, but unfortunately it's less frequent than it is in other places. So that was another reason why.
How are you going to put a bombshell in the USAAC world?
By creating this presentation and getting word out. So I've started with, for my research, I've started within 2 districts, school districts, and then I'm also a member of the national organization ASHA, as well as my state organization. So once I complete my research, my plan is to disseminate the results of my research and get word out there about the keyword signing, because yeah, so that is my plan. So
remember to
we'll have to see
keep nurturing yourself with the allies in Australia and other countries that are using it, because it can be a lonely road to try and break into the AAC world.
Yes, that's one thing. In my keyword sign workshop, I do have some slides that I do talk about how prevalent it is in the UK and Australia, and I actually mention keyword sign Australia by name. And so to build people's awareness that it is an effective AAC mode of communication, and so that it is used widely elsewhere. Yeah.
Thank you, Krista. That's great. Thanks, Sherry. Great question. Very quickly, Vicky, did you have a question for Krista?
Yeah, I did. Well, it's not really a question. Well, it is a question. Yes, it is a question, and I should know that because I'm a speech pathologist. When you talked about, I think you talked about, is it relational language as one of the vocabs that you had a look at? Is that what you would it would be the equivalent of interactional vocabulary, our interactive 1 and 2 vocabulary, the words that link other labels and verbs together? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
That refers to like the frequency with which we encounter those words in the vocabulary. And so it's very similar to the modern day terms core and fringe vocabulary.
Yeah.
Because that was another thing I took into consideration when I chose the vocabulary. The research that I was referencing, it was older, so they used older terminology, but really that's referring to our core and our fringe vocabulary. So I took that into consideration when I chose the vocabulary, because I want them to be able to have a starting vocabulary that they can combine. And so, because as we all know, the goal is to produce multiple word or multiple sign utterances. And so when I chose the vocabulary, that was the goal that I had in mind, so that they will have a knowledge of signs that their students can combine and start formulating those multiple sign utterances. Yeah.
Thank you. Great question. Thanks, Vicky, and thanks, Krista. Okay, so we'll stop it there and we'll move on to the next presentation, but I'm sure you can catch Krista in one of the breaks if you've got any further questions for her. So it's my pleasure now to introduce Olivia Skala for her presentation. So Olivia is a new graduate speech pathologist, and she's currently working in paediatric private practice. So she graduated from Australian Catholic University in 2020, where she completed her honours research, and she was looking at the lived experience of siblings of children who were using keyword sign. And Olivia is one of my lovely former honours students, and she was also co-supervised by Dr. Aniqa Farwa, who is from social work. So welcome, Olivia. Thank you. I'll just give one little reminder for everyone to please mute if you're not presenting, and that we have lovely Ivy Chu, who is providing technical support if you do have any difficulties. Thank you, Olivia. Please take it away.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Leigha, for that lovely introduction. So as Leigha said, today I will be presenting on my honours research, which is entitled Using Keyword Sign and Multimodal Communication, Stories from Siblings of Children with a Communication Disability. So as Leigha mentioned, this research was done as part of my degree last year in 2020, and it was supervised by Leigha herself and also Dr. Aniqa Farwa. So before we started our research project, we did an in-depth dive of the literature in this sort of space. And what we found was that family-centred practice was really important to successful AAC and keyword signing use, and that a particular focus on including all stakeholders was really important. And then when we looked further into the research, particularly for keyword sign, we found that there was some papers on the experiences of parents for carers and also that of peers, but there appeared to be a bit of a gap in terms of siblings. There wasn't really much there. Also, through our searching, we found that naturalistic settings were a really important factor for successful keyword sign use. And we also looked at some sibling-mediated interventions and found that there really wasn't a lot necessarily in the keyword sign or AAC space. It was more so around autism spectrum disorder and how sibling-mediated interventions could be used for joint attention and language. So I guess from all of that research, we kind of felt like there was a bit of a gap with siblings, and we had a particular interest in that population because if you think about it, siblings are lifelong communication partners for a child. They're often close in age and in relationship, and they're also often present in those naturalistic settings such as the home. So what were our research questions? Well, firstly, we wanted to know what were the experiences of learning and using keyword sign, and we wanted to hear those through the child's own words. We also wanted to understand sibling roles in learning, teaching, and using keyword sign. And finally, we wanted to know, does using keyword sign and other multimodal communication impact on sibling interactions and relationships? So a little bit about our study design. So, as I said, because there wasn't a lot in this space, we considered this exploratory research, and we used a qualitative research design because we wanted to hear about the children's lived experiences. So what we did is we recruited 7 participants aged 5 to 15 years, and we actually did that thankfully with the help of Keyword Sign Australia, as well as other organisations such as Down Syndrome New South Wales, who promoted our study for us. So originally our interviews were meant to be in person, but thank you to COVID, we had to do a bit of a sneaky switch to online interviews instead. So while that sort of seemed like a bit of a struggle at the time, the actual benefit of that was we got to interview siblings from all across Australia, so not just from New South Wales. And that meant that we got a good range of sibling ages, as well as, you know, different disabilities and also different sort of communication modes. But I guess the main thing is that all the families in some capacity did use keyword sign. So from those interviews, we got the stories of the children and we transcribed those and then kind of put them into reordered them into a rough structure with a sort of beginning, middle and end for analysis purposes. But also what we did is we simplified those stories and put them into a PDF story format and actually gave them back to the family so they could have a copy of their own stories, which was a really nice thing to have. So, having a look at some of our themes, we ended up with 3 core themes and 16 sub-themes from the research. So our first theme was called My Sibling and Me, and that kind of had a look at the roles that these typically developing siblings played within their sibling relationship. So the first one was that of a playmate, which you might expect. The siblings really enjoyed their time together and had lots of shared experiences, like Ben here, which is his pseudonym. He was 5 and talked about how he really liked playing Beyblades with his brother. There was also the role of the helper. So a lot of the siblings identified themselves as helpers, and they really normalised that idea of supporting their sibling in both communication tasks and non-communication tasks as well. Many of them also described themselves as teachers, like Sophie here, who's talking about how she would teach signs that she learned to her parents and to her grandparents so that they could teach them to her younger sister. And they were really proud of that knowledge that they had, and they wanted to share that with other people. And finally, that of the advocate. So we saw this with some of the older siblings, that they tended to advocate for their siblings' preferred communication styles, you know, talking positively about multimodal communication and keyword sign, and also trying to educate others on the reasons why their sibling might be using different forms of communication. So that was theme 1. Then thinking about theme 2, called Communicating with My Sibling. So this one sort of encapsulated, I guess, the nature in which siblings communicated with one another. So quite a few of the siblings identified communicating with their sibling as different. So even from a young age, even the 5 and 6-year-olds acknowledged that, something was a bit different, and they didn't talk to their sibling like how they talked to their parents or their peers. They had to use something new. They had to use keyword sign. So some of them did that, although a couple of our participants did say that actually communicating with their sibling wasn't that different to how they communicated with everyone else, and that it was normal and natural and the way that things had always been. Other siblings talked about how they were a good communicator. So they talked about how they understood their siblings' tone of voice, their body language, their sign approximations. And that, I guess, showed us that they were really attuned to their siblings' specific communication signals and specific communication needs as well. So I guess even though quite a few of the siblings talked about communication in a really positive light, they did also acknowledge some of the challenges that came with communicating with someone who has complex communication needs. So talking about some of the confusion and the frustration that comes with that. But a really positive thing that came out of it was actually that a lot of the siblings were really resourceful problem solvers. So even if they were having a communication problem with their sibling, they were able to enlist the help of a parent or consult one of their signing resources to help them solve that problem. And finally, theme 3, signing is part of our life. So this one looks at signing, I guess, as a bit of a journey for these siblings. So the siblings often talked about sharing their knowledge of sign. So like I said before, they were quite proud of that knowledge that they had and took real ownership of that. And they were really keen to share that with others. So they often shared it with their sibling, their own sibling, with their parents, grandparents. Even some children talked about, like Lucy, sharing their signing knowledge with a friend, and some even talked about sharing their signing knowledge with classmates at school as well. Then when it came to learning sign, we could see that it was sort of a dynamic and ongoing process, and siblings learned signs through that really ongoing repeated input, doing them all the time. And they learned through a variety of resources, so through handouts, signing courses, online apps, practicing through songs and books, all those really natural ways of practicing. And finally, siblings identified signing as a really special skill. Not only were they really proud to have it themselves, but also they understood the value that it held for their sibling and how important it was to have that shared communication so they could build closeness and a sense of trust as well. So I guess what are the key messages that we can take away from this research? Well, firstly, that siblings have unique, valid voices and a deep understanding of their brother or sister. I think sometimes we discount the voices of siblings because they are young, but in fact, this study showed us that they really do have something valuable to give, even from as young as 5 or 6 years old. We also learned that learning is dynamic and an ongoing process, but the siblings are really willing to be involved almost just as much as the parents. The siblings assumed many roles, so such as the playmate, the helper, the teacher, the advocate, and often embodied a combination of these roles. And really importantly, that siblings have the capacity to upskill themselves if given the resources, and also are willing to upskill others, both inside and outside the family. The siblings promoted inclusion, participation. So they talked about keeping, their sibling involved in the play activities and wanting to do things together. And they also considered a shared future. So they talked in a really positive way about the future. They talked about continuing to help their sibling, talking about living with their sibling in the future. There were lots of really nice messages that came through there. And finally, we learned that having this shared communication method of keyword sign led to better quality interactions between the siblings, and that sort of fostered a really nice sense of closeness and fondness between the siblings. So implications and future directions. So I guess within research, we're always thinking, okay, so what's the point? What can we take away from this, as clinicians, as researchers, or other people just working in the speech pathology field? So in terms of practice, we can start to consider siblings as valuable contributors. And also when we think about family-centered approaches, thinking about the whole family, not only the parents, but also considering the roles of siblings as well. We could also look to harnessing their knowledge and skills. So from what we saw, they actually have some really unique insights and special skills that to offer. And we can consider those when we're planning for our goals and our therapy interactions as well. Then in terms of research, because this is, I guess, an exploratory study, we could also think to further research about or where we prioritise the sibling voices, or perhaps looking at some more practical observations of sibling dyads. We could also think about the potential for more research around sibling-mediated interventions, perhaps in the keyword signing space. And also finally, that since this study focused on childhood siblings, I wonder whether perhaps there's some opportunity to do some research around adult siblings and whether the interactions, relationships and roles perhaps change over the lifespan. So something interesting to consider, I guess. So that's the end of my presentation. I hope that you really enjoyed learning about keyword signing and siblings. Feel free to ask any questions now, but otherwise I've popped my email up there if you have any questions later on. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Olivia. Well done and beautifully presented in such a clear but really personable way as well. I really, again, and I was in the research, felt and heard the voices of the children coming through with the stories that they were sharing. So thank you. We do have some time for some questions, so up to 5 minutes if anybody has any questions. I can see one there. Let me see whose hand that is. Hannah. Welcome, come off mute and ask your question.
Hi, thank you so much for that presentation. That was fantastic. I'm a speech pathologist as well, and it just really reminded me of times where I've had sessions with kids and their families, and one particular aspect of how often siblings seem more confident to kind of give it a go, whereas parents might be a bit more self-conscious about their keyword signing. And I was just wondering if that was anything that came through in your research about confidence, or I don't know, I guess it might not have been a theme so much, but.
Yeah, no, certainly. I mean, it wasn't necessarily a theme, confidence. I guess the good thing about doing those interviews, video interviews over Zoom versus, like filling out some sort of sheet or questionnaire, was that we kind of got to see that confidence come through. I think maybe Leigha would agree. We saw that confidence come through over Zoom, and I guess the tone in which some of the children talked through things like, oh, if there's a problem, I just do this, or yeah, I just learned it like this, and that was that. Like, they kind of talked about it in that really confident way. So I would agree. I don't know if we could necessarily compare it to parents because we didn't have a look at their perspectives within the research, but I would certainly say that a few of the children came across quite confidently with their knowledge. I mean, they certainly mentioned that they were still learning, but like you said, they were confident to give it a go, because it's intrinsically motivating. They want to play with their sibling, they want to talk to their sibling, and if keyword sign's the way to do that, then yeah, it seemed like they were willing to give it a go.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thanks so much, and just a great reminder about the voice that siblings have. So yeah, really encouraged by that. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Great question. Victoria, question from you. You're just on mute there, if you can unmute yourself.
Yes, if I had a t-shirt, I'd make a million. Great presentation, really interesting information there. Did you find that with the siblings that were involved in the research, that they were in families where the parents were modelling and creating a good multimodal environment, including keyword sign?
I guess I believe so. I think yeah, often the children talked about utilising their parents as one of the resources, sort of thing. So I guess from that you could probably infer that it was a multimodal rich environment, because I guess if the children are talking about going to their parents for support, then you would, I guess, expect that the parents would be using it at home
Sure.
as well. But I think we didn't look into much to it. But yeah, it was good to see that children were, I guess, independent, but also yeah, it came across like it was certainly being used in the home, as well as sometimes they would talk about you know, outside the home as well. And so it seemed like the families were using keyword sign both inside the home and as well as outside in the community, and sometimes at school as well.
Mm.
Maybe if I could just add, sort of from a just a sampling and recruitment point of view as well. I mean, we probably did have some self-selection bias happening insofar as to get to the children, we needed to go through the parents. So I think we had families who were very strongly involved in keyword sign, who probably felt that they were on their journey and their path of using keyword sign, and were sharing that sort of within their you know, that their family. And we saw a lot of extension to extended family as well as being part of that really core communication group. And it was just beautiful to see the kids, you know, every now and again they'll just say, hang on a minute, and they'd run off and get something, and they'd come back with a book, or they'd come back with a resource that they'd prepared or that mum had done, and they'd flip us through, you know, their signing pages. So, you know, even linking back to Hannah's question about confidence, it was just a level of certainty around what they had available as their resources, you know, to support the family to do keyword sign. And that was tangible things, but it was also the people around them. So yeah, that was lovely to see.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thanks,
Thank
Vicky.
you.
All right, so we might leave it there. Thank you again, Olivia, and we'll move on to, I could see another hand there. We might have to hold it over so that we can get into the next presentation. So next up, we have the first of two presentations from occupational therapy students who are delving into the world of keyword sign. So Aimee Hill is our first presenter, and she's a fourth year occupational therapy student doing honours at Western Sydney University. So for the last 12 months, she's been working on her project looking at some of the motor demands of the upper limb involved in signing. And I'm also supervising Aimee, which is lovely. And we are also involving Dr. Karen Liu from Western Sydney University as well. So over to Aimee. Thank you so much. Don't forget to unmute.
Thank you, Leigha. Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to be sharing with you today my honours research project, which is titled Development of a Coding and Classification Framework to Describe the Upper Limb Motor Demands of the Australian Keyword Sign Interactive Vocabulary. As Leigha mentioned, she's been my supervisor throughout the project. But before I begin my presentation, I must sort of preface by saying that before I began the research, I didn't know anything about keyword sign, and I haven't had any personal experience using it. So the project has been a really great learning opportunity, and I really hope that it contributes something important to the keyword sign community. So as you're aware, keyword sign is a manual signing method used with people with a disability and complex communication needs. Speech pathologists, as well as the person's family and other communication partners, use keyword sign with clients because it's effective for language and communication development. It's categorised as an unaided, augmentative and alternative communication strategy. From an occupational therapy perspective, keyword sign not only assists with communication, but the flow-on effect is that it helps facilitate engagement and participation in the daily occupations that the person needs to or wants to do, including school, work, play, leisure, and self-care. But keyword sign's not only a communication skill, it's also a really complex motor skill that requires motor planning and the ability to execute movements using joints of the upper limb. Many individuals with complex communication needs who are using keyword sign also experience motor challenges associated with their diagnosis. But currently, there's only a small amount of literature regarding keyword sign, and there's even less that discuss the motor demands involved in accurate production of the signs, particularly within the interactive vocabulary. This often means that clinicians are using keyword sign with their clients without sort of comprehensive evidence and an understanding of the motor requirements. Most of the existing literature that has been developed is from a language and linguistics perspective, which makes sense given that the manual signing is a communication intervention. However, it does mean that within the literature, there's often a lack of sort of a motor perspective or consideration of the motor factors. Some of you will be familiar with the acronym HOLM, which is currently used to describe the motor aspects of sign. But we don't actually know what parts of the upper limb are required to produce different hand shapes, movements, orientations, and locations. What specific physiological movements are needed to achieve production at an individual sign level, and how can understanding these demands further enhance the way we teach, modify, adapt, and support use of keyword sign. The aim of the study was to explore the upper limb motor demands of the Australian keyword sign interactive vocabulary and develop a framework that would allow clinicians to describe these motor demands. The idea was to add a layer of information to support clinical decisions being made by speech pathologists and occupational therapists when they work with individuals and families to select, modify, refine, and use keyword sign. We set out to answer 4 specific research questions. We wanted to know what the demands are within the keyword sign interactive vocabulary. We wanted to know how they could be analysed, described, and coded using a framework. We were interested in knowing how clinicians engaged with this framework, and also we wanted to gather their perspectives on its clinical application. To do this, we used a mixed methods approach and followed design-based research principles. We used a 6-stage iterative process, allowing for continual refinement. So stage 1 was about establishing the purpose and the goals of the project and identifying this pragmatic need. Stage 2 was about developing the framework, which we called the Motor Demands of Manual Signs Framework, or MODMAS for short. We then consulted a group of experts to help refine the terminology and make it easier to understand, as well as reducing some of the complexity of the movements that required coding. These experts were keyword sign presenters and also experts in the area of human anatomy and physiology. We then tested the framework with a group of 10 participants. We got them to use it for a set of signs and then comment on their experience using it. So the framework. This is the MODMAS framework as it stands today. You can see down the left-hand side the names of the different anatomical parts of the upper limb, which are involved in sign production. We start with easy to recognise terms like thumb, index finger, wrist, and elbow. But when we talk about the fingers, we needed to be more specific about the joints and the movements. So we used abbreviations for the anatomical names. So MCP refers to metacarpophalangeal joint of the fingers, or sort of the big knuckles. Across the top are the movements possible at these joints. And you can see the shaded cells there. They represent the movements that are not possible at that particular joint. So for example, supination and pronation are specific to the forearm. This is an example of one of the slides that were provided to the participants. So we gave them a line drawing, a description of the sign, and a video of me producing the sign. So this is for the sign HOT. And here is what the framework would look like completed for the sign HOT. So the way that you would sort of use it, so looking at the sign HOT, we're sort of using that flat hand shape with sort of extension at sort of that MCP and IP level. The fingers are sort of glued together, which is the adduction that you can see there. During the motion, the wrist sort of stays in a very neutral position. So we've coded it sort of in that far left column there as being neutral. The forearm actually goes through 2 separate movements. So it starts in a neutral position, but by the end of the sign, we're in a prone position. So we have sort of 2 shaded in the one row there. For elbow, similar thing happens. We have both extension and flexion occurring at the elbow joint, and with the shoulder, we're flexing because it's coming in front of the body. Our arm is coming away from our side, so it's adduction, and there's also some medial rotation because the hand comes in front of the body. So that's typically how you would use the framework to analyse the sign. For two-handed signs, we asked participants to indicate in the table dominant and non-dominant by using the letter D for dominant and ND for non-dominant. So testing the framework. To complete the initial testing phase, we recruited 10 clinicians. It was open to speech pathologists and occupational therapists, but we only received interest from speech pathologists who were actively using keyword sign within their role. And these participants came from New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, and Western Australia. We provided each participant with a comprehensive resource package consisting of photos and video demonstrations and completed MODMAS frameworks to help them learn about the framework and the anatomy and terminology of the upper limb. We asked them to individually apply the MODMAS framework to analyse 10 selected signs from the keyword sign interactive vocabulary. And once they finished this, we asked them to complete an online survey about their experience. Participants had 4 weeks to do this from the time that they received the materials to submission of the task. So these are the keyword signs that from the interactive vocabulary that we chose. The set was modelled in the resource and we provided, the research set highlighted in yellow are the signs that the participants analysed, and we matched them up to reflect a combination of one-handed signs and two-handed signs, and also to reflect the number of different hand shapes, movements, locations, and orientation combinations that are present. Once the participants returned their completed frameworks, we analysed them by comparing them to the coding of the correct analysis, which we achieved consensus on during the expert meetings. They were analysed for accuracy at a sign level and anatomical level within and across participants. The survey responses were analysed by grouping together some themes based on the similarity of the quotes. So our results. Overall, we noticed that there was a lot of variety in the accuracy scores for each participant, particularly in relation to the different signs and anatomical levels. None of our participants achieved 100%, and on 3 occasions, participants achieved 0, which means that they made at least 1 error in every row on the framework. For each participant, we calculated their average score, and the highest that was achieved was 82.86 and the lowest was 46.43. So you can see there's quite a large range in the scores. We actually had 3 participants out of 9 who achieved an average score of less than 50%. So this indicates that some participants were sort of able to identify the movements better than others. The most accurately coded sign was no/not, which is one of the one-handed signs, and the least accurately coded was now, which is a two-handed sign. At the anatomical level, results showed that the finger joints were more accurately coded and the shoulder was the least accurate. And this wasn't necessarily surprising, considering that the shoulder is capable of many more movements and can often be hard to observe and identify compared with the smaller and straightforward movements of the fingers. We asked participants to rate their level of agreement with some statements regarding the framework, and in general, participants had a lot of positive feedback. They agreed that the framework allowed them to identify the upper limb demands of manual signs. They said that it could be helpful when matching the demands of the signs to the abilities of their clients. They agreed that the information was detailed, and they also said that it could indicate the level of complexity of a particular sign. Overall, participants agreed that the MODMAS framework could help them make clinical decisions about signs and support their keyword sign use with clients. However, participants did not necessarily find it easy and efficient to use, and they may not use it in their clinical practice. With regards to the open text responses, 3 major themes were derived from the participants' quotes. The first theme was in relation to the potential use of the framework. Participants identified that they could use the framework to gather information to modify and adapt target signs, to support goal setting, to select vocabulary and adapt it to meet their clients' needs. It would help them understand the complexity of the sign, And a lot of them mentioned that they would work with OTs, which is therefore facilitating that interprofessional collaboration. Other comments were in relation to the tailoring of vocabulary taught within keyword sign workshops. And one participant mentioned that using the framework can be a great way to tangibly document sort of the thought process that is happening in relation to sign implementation. One comment from one of the participants was in relation to the potential for the framework to be misused or misinterpreted to fix handshapes or to exclude vocabulary because they thought that it might be too difficult. And we also acknowledge this as a potential sort of misinterpretation of the framework. So in the future, we will sort of provide education around correct sort of appropriate use of the framework. The second theme was in relation to challenges experienced using the framework and challenges that might exist when we're applying the framework. So they identified that the knowledge and understanding of anatomy and physiology could be a barrier, that the terminology was sometimes too complex, and actually coding the movements was quite a cognitively demanding task. Quite a number of participants said that it was time consuming, which we also anticipated. And some of them commented that in order to match the signs with their motor abilities, of the clients, they'd have to know what the motor abilities of their clients were. And as speech pathologists, they didn't necessarily have this information. But luckily, there was a couple of participants that acknowledged that over time, with their familiarity with the framework, that it would improve in terms of efficiency and effectiveness of use. Third theme was in relation to suggested improvements. Many participants stated that in future iterations or refinement of the framework that we should reduce some of the anatomical jargon even further. And there's also the potential to create a simpler version for speech pathologists. Some participants stated that they would we should include additional education to enhance the accessibility of the framework. And another idea that was mentioned by a couple of participants was sort of creating a database or an index of pre-filled information, which would sort of reduce the demands in completing it for each of the individual signs, and provide resources with information that is categorized by hand shape and motor demand. So what's next? This data has provided some great insight into how clinicians may use the framework, and they provided many great suggestions for continued refinement. Due to the constraints of the honours timeframe, we were not able to conduct stages 5 and 6, so this would be one of the goals for future research. And this research would include continued refinement, like I said, and also more testing in a more sort of formal setting, and also should encompass more sort of multidisciplinary perspectives, maybe including teachers and other members of the team and communication partners. There may also be an opportunity to include the framework in keyword sign training in the future, maybe through simulations or demonstrations for use. So that's it for my presentation. Are there any questions?
Thank you very much, Aimee. Well done. That's the first time Aimee's presented her work outside of her honours group. So really brave there, coming out and sharing it with the community. Really proud of you. Any questions for Aimee about her framework? We're doing well with time, so we've got about 3 minutes to be able to do questions or even comments or thoughts, or you know, whether you resonate with any of that qualitative feedback. So let me have a look. I've got hands coming up. Olivia, is it? Yes.
Yes. Yeah. No, I didn't want to ask a question. I just wanted to make a comment that I thought that was really interesting and good to get an OT's perspective. I think certainly in my own practice, I've come across a couple situations where there have been motor limitations and we have wanted to use keyword sign, and it's been quite tricky with the production side of things. on the client's part. So I think it just gave that framework gave a really interesting insight into all the. I didn't realise how many different things were involved in the production of just one sign. So really well done there.
Thank you.
Thanks, Olivia. Lisa, you had a question.
Yeah, hi. I also just wanted to say thanks, Aimee. I think that's just such a great prompt for us to then think about how children that we're supporting are using, I guess, their motor skills in terms of signing. I support a little boy who has Down syndrome. He's just turned 3, and he works with various speech pathologists and music therapists and OTs, etc. But I think if we can combine some of those ideas you've talked about, it'll really help with our understanding. Like I'll identify that when he signs train, he signs it kind of in the middle of his body instead of up at his head where you would usually sign it. And I think if I can start to identify how he's doing that as we see kind of improvements with his core strength, he might be able to then reach that goal of signing it in the right location. So I think the combination of home and the motor skill ideas is really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, good comments. And Melissa Sue?
Hi, thank you so much, Aimee, for sharing that info. As a speechy and one who works with a number of OTs, it's a shame that you weren't able to get more OTs participating in your research. Have you had any, I guess, conversations or any further opportunities to engage OTs in your research and that framework that obviously you as an OT, I would see has more knowledge and skill set around the actual framework, but any other opportunities to get OT feedback on that?
Not yet, but definitely in the future, I think incorporating the different perspectives will be the biggest benefit, I think, to application of the framework. We've even that some of our participants were working in solo environments without occupational therapists as support. So it might also include, the creation of supports for those who don't have access to or don't work in a current sort of multidisciplinary setting as well.
I think Aimee will just have to come back and do a master's to do the formative, the summative sort of phase of the evaluation and broaden that scope a little bit. I can see some other questions, but maybe you could hold those and perhaps connect with Aimee in the upcoming break so that we can move on to our final presentation of the session. Thanks again, Aimee. So our last presentation is from Nathalie Despois, who is also a 4th-year occupational therapy student at Western Sydney University. She's also my student. And she and Aimee have been working on different components of the same idea around the motor demands of sign. So she's also been completing her research over the last 12 months. So welcome, Nathalie.
Hello, sorry, can you hear me?
We can hear you, but we've just lost visual of your screen and of you.
I'll just bring that back up.
Yeah.
All right, can you guys see that now?
Yes, and if you just want to go, that's it, slideshow mode, that looks great.
Perfect.
Okay. Take it away. Thanks, Nathalie.
All right, thank you so much, Leigha. Good morning, everyone. I am really grateful for this opportunity to share my honours research project with you. As Leigha mentioned, it is about the upper limb motor demands of Australian keyword sign and focusing particularly on parent and caregiver perceptions. But before I begin, I would just like to say a really big thank you to the participants that were involved in the study for sharing their experiences and expertise about keyword sign. So access to communication represents an essential human need as well as a basic human right. Individuals with complex communication needs often use augmentative and alternative communication, or AAC, to supplement or replace their speech. And that is where keyword sign comes in as an unaided AAC strategy designed to optimize an individual's communication potential by building their expressive and receptive language skills. Although research about keyword sign is steadily growing, there is still only a relatively small amount. An area that has received almost no research focus is the nature of the motor demands involved in the accurate production of manual signs. Although a single sign represents a single word, it requires a sequence of coordinated movements in order to accurately produce it. So in the same way that the word help requires accurate planning and production of the sounds h, l, p, the sign for help requires accurate planning and production of a sequence of motor movements. And so in this way, we can see that keyword sign is a motor skill as well as a linguistic skill, and people learning keyword sign need to learn, remember, and recall the upper limb movements involved. Parents and caregivers are viewed as the most consistent communication partners for individuals that use keyword sign because of the key role that they have in modelling and teaching it to their child. Understanding parent and caregiver experiences of learning keyword sign will help improve training, education, service provision, and support. And so because of this, it is important to understand the experiences of families in order to deliver services that are consistent with family-centered principles. So with all of this in mind, our research aimed to develop an in-depth understanding of parent and caregivers' experiences of learning, recalling, and using keyword sign, with an emphasis on their perceptions of the motor movements involved. The research questions that were addressed in the study include, what are communication partners' experiences of learning keyword sign? What perceived challenges do communication partners experience when learning to accurately produce new motor movements in signs? And what strategies do communication partners find helpful in supporting their learning of new motor movements involved in signs? And I just wanted to mention that ethics approval for this study was obtained from the Western Sydney University Human Research Ethics Committee. Recruitment for this study occurred online through Keyword Sign Australia, as information about the study was distributed via email and also social media. The participants in this study were parents and caregivers of people who used keyword sign. We had 8 people agree to be interviewed, and they participated in a Zoom interview due to the COVID-19 restrictions at the time. The interviews were recorded for transcription, and all the participants' names were changed to pseudonyms to maintain their privacy and confidentiality. So as we continue to discuss the study's results, keep in mind that the names of both the participants and their children have been changed. We selected a qualitative research design to address the study's research questions and phenomenology as the methodological approach. We used in-depth semi-structured interviewing as our data collection method and interpretative phenomenological analysis, or IPA, as our data analysis method to help us develop the core themes and sub-themes. So from the data analysis process, we developed 3 core themes and 9 associated sub-themes that I would like to share with you. So the first theme, which is called We're All on Board Together, identified the way that participants' ongoing collaboration with family, community, and key support, such as health professionals, is critical to a successful learning experience. This was recorded by one of the participants, Jane, who shared, "We have a really good speech pathologist. We get lots of visual resources and stuff from her weekly to reiterate what we'd been learning in sessions." So having a community of support across important settings where the child spends large amounts of time increased both participants' commitment to learning keyword sign and the number of communication partners available to the child. One participant, Haley, illustrated these points. She said, "It's definitely helped at daycare. It's helped with her speech therapy. So it's definitely built her relationships everywhere, I would say, in all her settings. And her grandparents have learned it and everyone's really trying for her. I don't think it would be effective without all 3 settings using it." However, some participants experienced the impact that a non-supportive environment makes on the learning experience and demonstrated the active role that parents play in advocating for the right supports. Jane's story highlighted this in the following. She said, "We had to swap daycares because the daycare she originally went to didn't want to do keyword sign and wouldn't participate or provide Sophie a safe environment. So we moved daycares and they have gone above and beyond. They're actually doing a center approach, so everyone will be learning keyword sign." From this, we can see that finding the right supports is a really powerful element that enhances learning in many different environments. The second theme, personalizing our signing journey, reflected participant strategies and decisions that enabled them to have personalized learning experiences. Each participant recognized the need to use signs within familiar routines and settings, such as the home, daycare, and other community environments. More than half of the participants discussed the individualized strategies that they used to incorporate signs in these settings. For example, one of the participants, Valerie, shared how she used stories at bedtime as an opportunity to model signs. So she said, "You can slowly read through a book and do a couple of signs whilst you're reading the story." Most participants also adapted their learning of keyword sign to follow their child's lead and accommodate for their needs. This further highlighted the idea that the child and parent learning experience is very difficult to separate. One participant, Heather, discussed how her son's motivation is a major influence in the signs that they learn and the learning strategies that they use. She reported that her son is very motivated by music, so we find we do a lot of music and singing. Another aspect of personalizing the learning experience was around tailoring various keyword sign supports. Most participants found that the resources that they used to learn keyword sign were more relevant and effective when they were customized. So in particular, looking at individualized training courses, participants perceived that individualized training courses added more meaning to their learning experience and made it easier to incorporate signs regularly across different environments. This was highlighted by one of the participants, Hayley, who worked with a keyword sign presenter to ensure that meaningful routines and activities were reflected in the training. She said, "We really designed the workshop around my parents and the daycare to teach them how to incorporate it into their everyday." The final theme, called Learning Signs, recognized participants' understanding of factors that influence sign learning, recall, and use. More than half of the participants reported feeling that it was important to gradually build the number of signs they learned, as this gave them more time to sort of cement the signs in their minds. Each participant utilized a range of strategies to help themselves remember and practice the signs. And some of the strategies that were frequently discussed by participants included songs, memory hooks, videos, and nursery rhymes. One participant, Valerie, discussed how the repetitive elements of nursery rhymes provided opportunities to practice signs. So she said nursery rhymes work really well because they just repeat and repeat and repeat. So we found them to be really useful as a tool to help learning with signs, especially if it's a song that gets catchy in your head. But again, what works for one family might not necessarily work for another. And so finding the most effective learning strategy was viewed by participants as necessary to improve their ability to remember signs. Although one of the primary aims of this study was to explore parent and caregivers' perceptions of learning the motor components of keyword sign, as participants shared their experience, it became clear that the motor components were not often consciously considered. When participants were directly asked about their experiences of learning and retaining motor movements, we got varied responses. One participant, Michelle, reflected that the ones that we use all the time are ingrained now, but the ones that we don't use as often, sometimes it takes a quick minute to come back. And this demonstrates an experience of the use it or lose it principle of neuroplasticity and the effectiveness of using signs in natural routines and experiences. The participants also offered mixed responses when asked to consider whether they felt learning keyword sign was more like learning a new physical or motor skill, or whether it was more like learning a new language. Overall, there was no consensus as to whether keyword sign is more of a new motor skill or language, but majority of the participants did mention that they hadn't really thought about it like that before. When one participant, Michelle, was asked her opinion on this, she responded by saying, "I think because a lot of the signs are intuitive and then other signs are quite easy to do, I didn't really consider it as a motor skill. I just never thought of it that way." And although some participants considered keyword sign to be more like a new language, the learning strategies that all participants spontaneously talked about were consistent with a motor learning approach. And so from this, we can see that the motor considerations of keyword sign are a small yet important component that is really embedded within the overall experience of learning keyword sign. There are multiple implications for practice that have resulted from the unique findings of this work. The participants in this study emphasized the benefits of an individualized approach to learning signs, and therefore future training programs could be created in collaboration with parents and caregivers to ensure that they are meeting their learning needs. Parents and caregivers also need to be supported in their learning journey, by professionals such as speech pathologists, as the study has shown that regular support is needed to ensure consistency in keyword sign use across many different settings. The continued development of accessible, age-appropriate resources that align with the strategies that parents identified as successful for learning keyword sign would also benefit the learning experiences. So these are things such as videos and songs and nursery rhymes. And so overall, there is a great impact that the parents' experiences of learning keyword sign can have on the broader keyword sign community in terms of shared knowledge, co-constructed services, and resources. So in summary, this study has demonstrated that an individualized learning approach ensures that the signs learnt are meaningful and meeting the needs of the users. Collaboration between communication partners and key supports enhances family commitment to using keyword sign and also increases its effectiveness across multiple settings. The results also showed that the motor features of sign are considered a small yet important component within a larger experience of learning keyword sign. And lastly, the finding of this study have potential to inform clinical practice, development of resources to support family and individuals using keyword sign, education initiatives, and communication partner training. So thank you so much for listening. Were there any questions?
Thank you very much, Nathalie. Great presentation. Well done. Again, very clearly going through your findings. We can't actually see
so
you.
Sorry. So sorry.
Here she is. So that's what she looks like. I'm sure you were very animated there behind the screen as you were presenting.
I'm so sorry. I didn't realise that you couldn't see.
That's quite all right. We do have a bit of time before the end of the session. So if there are any questions for Nathalie, she'd warmly welcome those, I'm sure. Or if any were held over from a previous presenter, you're welcome to say those too. So again, if you want to use the hand up function on the top of your toolbar or just come off mute. No, I think everybody's gearing up towards a morning tea break that happens at 11:20. If that is the case, I just want to sort of say thank you so much to all of our presenters. Some really diverse work and diverse perspectives there, and I really like sort of particularly in the qualitative, space, emphasis on lots of different voices, and just thank you to our OT students who have really explored this realm of keyword sign from a different perspective and are so keen to sort of collaborate and add a dimension to the way that we think about signing. That's really great work, and good luck in submitting your thesis in the next couple of weeks. I know I've got drafts sitting with me at the moment to look at, so that's exciting. I'll stay on and so will the presenters until about 11:20, but anybody else who would like to move into the morning tea break, there is a separate platform, I believe, to engage with. Andy, is there anything you'd like to share about how participants do that?
Okay, So Toucan is a really nice platform for chatting, much better than Teams or Zoom. Basically, you log in, it's going to ask you to set a 10-digit password. Then later it tells you could do an 8-digit one. Don't believe the 8, it has to be 10. If you can't get in, make sure it's 10. My colleagues who were saying, well, how do I do that? All my passwords are 8. I said, add 01 to the end. It's fine. It's not that complicated. So once you're in, you can gravitate towards somebody and join bubbles with them and have a chat, but everybody in the room can see all the other bubbles. So if Leah's talking to a heap of people and Karen's talking to a heap of people and I want to go and chat to Karen, I can go into her bubble, I can leave, pop into Leah's bubble. It's really much more like at a conference when you stand around with a few people and have a chat. We've used it a few times, people really like it, but Chloe is on her email and SMS and phones. If anybody's having major difficulties with Toucan, we have the tech support to help you through it. But I'm going to go and make a cuppa and see you all in Toucan in a couple minutes.
That sounds great. Thanks so much, Andy. Victoria, I've just noticed a question. Did you hand up? Did you have a question or a comment or?
No, I just think it's fantastic that the students are now being introduced to keyword sign in their undergraduate time. You know, obviously I'm an oldie, but, you know, I didn't discover keyword sign until quite a way into my career. And I think, you know, once you discover and immerse yourself in keyword sign, you just realize how beneficial it is, not just for people that have communication, complex communication needs, but, you know, in areas like bridging the gap for children and adults that are from a non-English speaking background, for instance, communicating with the parents, with the children, and then with yourself, and then also involving other forms of AAC amongst that as well. It is just such a fantastic conduit, and you know, not only receptively but expressively, and I am such an advocate of it, and I just wish that it was part of more induction programs for people who work with people with disabilities, etc. and so forth. So well done to not only the speech path students but the OT students who are obviously getting on board as well. And you know, that motor formation is just so important to think about when we're teaching and learning the signs and choosing the signs for the different participants that use it. So so well done, everybody. Fantastic.
Thank you for your feedback, Vicky. All right, thanks all, and thanks Ivy for your support behind the scenes with the session. Go and have a cuppa and a chat, and look forward to seeing you back in the rest of the day. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Leah.